This week's episode of the Salt and Sauce Chat Show is sponsored by North Broad Street Records, bringing you the very best in unissued music. North Broad Street Records discovers and brings to vinyl cool, unfinished gems. For more information, please visit www.northbroadst.co.uk. Coming up on this week's Salt and Sauce Chat Show.
I write for therapy. I feel it's really good for my mental health. So if I'm writing and working and interviewing, then I'm like a nicer mum. My eldest is at Birmingham and my middle one's at Leeds. And just completely coincidentally, and they were following the rules, they both got it the same week. One quite badly and one not so badly. But I think I kind of fell apart actually, because it was just so heartbreaking. And I think it was as soon as they'd both gone back. So, I hadn't want to let them go back after the summer, but they're adults and they made their own choices. And yeah, it was really hard. We were brought up, I suppose he was sort of working in a life and death situation daily, trying to save women's lives. So we were brought up, I think, in a way that, we learned how to speak to people, how to handle sensitive situations. And I actually think that's helped me in my work.
Welcome along to another episode of the Salt and Sauce Chat Show. I'm David Simmonds. On this week's show, I am delighted to be joined by well-known lifestyle journalist and celebrity interviewer. We've got Suzanne Baum on the show today. Suzanne, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's much appreciated. So you're a freelance journalist, like say you interview the celebs as well. How did you get into that line of work?
So I've been doing this for about 22 years. My first job was actually an editorial assistant at the Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle. And then they kind of trained me on the job, and then I just happened to fall into it. Yeah,
you enjoy it. How many years is that now you've been doing it?
The celebrity interviews?
Yeah.
Probably for about 15 years.
Wow. So who's been your favourite celebrity you've interviewed?
So this might show my age. I'm 47, but Andre Agassi. Have you heard of Andre Agassi?
Yes, a famous tennis player.
Yeah, so I grew up loving tennis, and he was like my idol and my pin-up and everything. And then actually when I was asked if I wanted to interview him, can't remember who it was for. I think it was for the Times about 5 years ago. At Wimbledon, it was like my dream job, and I literally had to really hold it together, not make a fool of myself, and he was just so lovely. And the research for it was fun as well, because obviously before, you kind of feel you know a lot about celebrities, but I actually read his autobiography before reading him, and that was fascinating.
Wow. So you've interviewed like loads of people. Just to rattle some of them off, the likes of Joe Wicks recently, Judge Rinder, you've done Laura Whitmore, Jess Glynn, Fern Cotton, Davina McCall. You're also a mum of three. Where do you fit it all in?
Well, I'm lucky. I think I have a nice balance. My older two are at university, and well, look, obviously things are different now. So I write for therapy. I feel it's really good for my mental health. So if I'm writing and working and interviewing, then I'm like a nicer mum. Although at the minute I've only got my 11-year-old at home, who I'm he's self-sufficient now at secondary school. So I'm sort of half ignoring him and half sort of being on top of him. But he loves it, because I've been able to interview people in lockdown that he's actually been fascinated in. I think I mentioned to you Alex Kingston, for example. And my son's a massive Doctor Who fan. So I actually asked the school if I could make that, if he could miss out on some school and actually sit in with me on the interview. So it worked brilliantly.
Brilliant. One thing that's really taken off at the moment, obviously during lockdown, is everybody's watching Netflix, and one of the big shows at the moment is this. I've not seen it yet. So the Bridgerton, is that correct? Is that how you pronounce it?
I haven't seen it actually.
Not yet.
My husband has not seen it. It is amazing, and I'm smiling as I'm talking to you, because it was such a treat to get to interview the cast. And I think, well, look, if your listeners, they probably have watched it, because so many, the numbers that have watched it are huge. They'll understand, that you sort of, in this rubbish lockdown time, and then this amazing period drama came on Christmas Day, and it kind of lifted everyone. Yes, it was actually a dream job to interview the cast, and it's a beautiful drama. So there was so much to talk to them about.
Wow. I mean, sticking with Netflix, you've also interviewed Selling Sunset, their sort of lead person, if you like. I've not watched that either. I've watched the $1 million Listings New York, which is kind of a spin-off to the Selling Sunset. Christina,
so I couldn't watch that. Sorry, I couldn't watch that because having watched Selling Sunset, well, firstly, I'd had enough of that kind of sort of, topic. But secondly, Selling Sunset was amazing. I didn't actually think anything could top that. That was at the beginning of lockdown as well, actually, I think.
Yeah, it was Christine Quinn that you interviewed from there, wasn't it? How was she?
Yeah. So I interviewed all the women apart from, who did I not interview? Apart from Giselle, because I think she was filming Dancing with the Stars in America.
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, Christine was amazing, considering she comes across so sort of narky and scary on the show. She was, look, people said maybe she was nice to me because I was a journalist, but she was honestly so lovely. And even during lockdown, when I've had a bit of a rough time myself, with both my kids at university were really poorly with COVID at the same time, actually. She reached out to me and constantly messaged me. She didn't have to do that. I'm no one to her, but it was just so touching. And we've sort of formed a really sweet virtual friendship.
Has there been other celebs that you've interviewed that you've formed maybe a bond with and kept in touch with after an interview?
Joe Wicks, definitely. I mean, I know people maybe have sort of, they've had so much Joe Wicks, but I think I interviewed him 3 times during lockdown because he was doing so much for charity and so much for the kids in the school. Joe's wicked. Who else? My kids are driving me mad. They're actually not interested. They do not give a hoot who I interview, apart from I'm still trying to get a Spurs player because they're massive Spurs fans. And I'm nowhere close. I don't think I'll ever get to interview a Spurs player.
Well, if Jose Mourinho's watching, then maybe I can put him in touch with you.
That would be a dream.
I did see online as well, you interviewed Matthew Morrison, who played Mr. Shue in Glee. You said he was a delight to interview, one of your highlights.
Yeah, he was so lovely to interview, and it was so random because I'd obviously watched him in that show, whereas the hook for the interview was he was doing something with the BBC. They were sort of running an education program, so he was teaching a theatrical lesson to kids. So I interviewed him on the back of that, but I was like, oh my God, it's like what was his name?
Mr. Shue.
Mr. Shue. And I was like, and it was the same with Alex Kingston. Again, I'm showing my age, but I binge watched her in ER. So there's me having watched her in ER and my 11-year-old having watched her in Doctor Who. So yeah, it was wicked.
Well, I mean, how social media sort of changed the way you carry out these interviews? Because, obviously, this is, no one had heard about Zoom, for instance, before lockdown happened. How's the whole social media, the Facebook, how's that helped in your research? You mentioned you've done it for quite a few years now. How have you noticed a change in social media?
Well, to be honest, I've only really started using Instagram. I'm quite new to Instagram. I've probably only been on it for a couple of years, but actually... firstly, I'm sick to death of Zoom, and I'm so cross because, the amount of people I've interviewed this year, last year, I think mainly because, normally celebrities are quite difficult to get hold of or to pin time down with them, but because they, like us, were stuck at home, they were so much more accessible. So I was interviewing everybody and thinking, you know what? I just wish I could be interviewing you face to face because there's nothing like doing a face to face interview. Especially when you then go and write it up because you can write about the drama and the colour of the interview. So Zoom is Zoom, I've had enough. Everybody's had enough. But going back to social media, it's been amazing because I think, I can sort of do a lot of my research, seeing what they're doing on Instagram, for example. Yeah. Like Peter Andre, who's always a good bloke to interview. My research, I can sort of just check his story, see what he was up to, literally 5 minutes before the interview, and then, chat about that. So, yeah, it's good.
Yeah, Suzanne, so am I right in saying that you've done a lot of red carpet work, like a Mike Sin situation on the red carpet?
I love doing red carpet interviews. They're so much fun. I think I'm like a child though, because I just get so excited. Mainly because I think, I feel so lucky getting to do the job I do, getting to interview, the stars who at the end of the day are just normal people. And yeah, and it's quite nice to I'm about to say it's quite nice to get dressed up and, glammed up, but this is actually a dress I've got on. It's probably the first time I've put a dress on in a year.
I feel honoured. You're a huge fan of dogs as well. You love your dogs. Am I right in saying you've done some dog yoga? Did I see that online?
Yeah. Oh my God. I was about to say I've done everything with dogs. Sorry. I am obsessed with my dog. My cockapoo has literally... Anyone that has a dog will agree. They're just like, they're so special and they're so lovely. And I think especially in lockdown, they've given us so much comfort, I suppose, at a time where I can't hug anyone other than, my husband and my 11-year-old. It was I love my dog. And I think getting out and about, when we've been allowed to walk has been good. And I'm obsessed with my dog.
You talked about earlier how your sons were away to uni there at Leeds Uni, and they actually contracted COVID while away, weren't they? Is that right?
Yeah.
That must be hellish, like for a mother, obviously not being able to get there. How did you cope with that?
I don't think I coped because I had to cope. Actually, my eldest is at Birmingham and my middle one's at Leeds, and just completely coincidentally, and they were following the rules. They both got it the same week. One quite badly and one not so badly. But I think I kind of fell apart actually because it was just so heartbreaking. And I think it was as soon as they'd both gone back. So, I hadn't want to let them go back after the summer, but they're adults and they made their own choices. And yeah, it was really hard. But, people have been through so much rubbish this year. I just count myself lucky that, they had it, they got over it and, they were okay.
So have they made a full recovery now?
Yeah, I mean, one of them's only really just got his taste buds back after maybe 2 months, but my cooking's rubbish. So maybe that's just because of my cooking, but yeah, they're fine now.
Oh, brilliant. Going back to sort of the work that you do, you do a lot in the beauty industry as well. Am I right in saying that you write a piece on beauty quite a lot for a lot of, for example, we've got like OK Magazine, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, Heat, to name a few that you'll write for. How did you get into that sort of line of work to review the beauty side of things?
I've been doing beauty forever, but I think there's such a big market now for anti-aging and sort of middle-age products that I think I was like a really good person that was like, they were like, Suzanne, don't take this personally. And I'm like, no, I'd love to review. So I think I've done loads on like the sort of, mature skin products and stuff, but it's a really nice part of the job doing the beauty writing. It's interviewing people's fun and exciting, but actually being able to properly have a good beauty editorial background and write about products is another part of being a journalist. And it's I do it for the Evening Standard, the Independent, pretty much for everyone. It's lovely, and I'm lucky,
Yeah, I mean, one story I come across, I'm just going to quote here, a £600 facial as good as a facelift. Suzanne Baum gives her verdict on a non-invasive facial from Shane Cooper, who boasts the likes of Mia Jama, Rita Ora, Jessie J amongst his fans between us. Was it worth the £600, do you think, now looking back?
1,000,000 times over. I think skincare and skin products and skin treatments, there's a cheap end, the medium end, and the exclusive end, and that was a very exclusive treatment. And I'd never have that normally, ever. I couldn't afford it, but it was out of this world. And you know what? I'm married to a lawyer, and I'm a very honest journalist. So had it have been rubbish, I'd have told the truth, and it was unbelievable.
So how does that? How did that differentiate for like a normal facial? How does a £600 facial differ from your normal facial that you would go in and get at a salon?
It's all about the machines. So it's all about rather than sort of using your hands, you're tooled and you're pummeled and you're put under numerous machines, and it really does work.
Wow. You covered the news desk as well on This Morning, is that correct?
I was used as a shifter when they needed somebody. That was such a lovely job. I loved going into This Morning, just because you were kind of, you were taken very seriously there, because being on the news desk, you kind of, you were interviewing celebrities, but there was breaking news, topical news, had to get guests in on the sofa. I think it was a faster paced environment, and I loved it, because you kind of, you're working on whatever's breaking news is. So, yeah, I remember, I think, when the bombs were, I can't remember what year, a few years ago in London, and, it was so fast paced, and you had to try and speak to as many people as possible, get people, that were affected to come into the studio. And it was exhilarating, actually, when you're sort of working on something so urgent. And, I love that part of writing on hard news, actually. Yeah,
because you're also quite a regular contributor to Good Morning Britain as well.
Well, we're going back some time. Again, they kind of called me in when they were sort of not desperate, but I was a shifter. So, yeah, and I love doing that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've got lots of strings to your bow. You do kind of everything, don't you, Suzanne?
I told you what I was paid, though, honestly.
Aye, well, there we go. You've also do a blog as well for a parent website, Brit Mums, is that right?
I've done loads of parenting stuff. In fact, when my kids were little, that sort of, I said to you jokingly that writing is therapeutic for me, but actually it's true. I think, like some people like cooking, some people like using their hands for different skills. I have always written. So, through a bit of postnatal depression, cesareans, hormones, everything, there's so much you can cover in parenting that I sort of just wrote from my own experiences, actually.
Yeah, you've also done a piece during lockdown as well, when we go back to the beauty side of things. Something that quite a lot of people resonate with. I mean, obviously not so much myself, but hairdressers were closed, weren't they? No one could go and get their hair cut. No one could go get their nails done. Obviously, once lockdown was over, you were in, was it 3 a.m. you got your hair cut?
Yeah, it was brilliant, actually. I love doing that, because, again, that was topical. And also it was so unusual because, maybe not for yourself, like you say, but for a woman who is, used to getting her hair done, and, I'm someone that gets my nails done every few weeks. It was really unusual for everything to shut. So it was almost, I was happy to go and do these jobs, because it was actually an eye-opener to see, how our world has changed. And this is what the new salons are going to look like. This is how you're going to get your hair done. This is how we're going to keep you safe. And I love doing that, actually.
Yeah. I want to talk about your dad. Your dad is very high up. He's a professor, Michael Baum. He's one of the world leading breast cancer specialists. Yeah. You must be hugely proud of the work your dad does.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I am. And actually, it's made me, I think, not so much sensitive as a journalist, but more able, I think, we were brought up, I suppose he was sort of working in a life and death situation daily, trying to save women's lives. So we were brought up, I think, in a way that, we learned how to speak to people, how to handle sensitive situations. And I actually think that's helped me in my work, because, for example, during COVID, I did a breaking story on a wonderful lady who, had beaten cancer and then had got COVID and had beaten COVID. And I think it's sometimes quite heart-wrenching to write these stories. So I think sort of my father taught me how to be gentle, how to be sensitive to people. And it was lovely. Apart from if I broke a toe or broke a fingernail, he didn't give a hoot.
You done a shared piece on breast cancer with Sky News anchor Kay Burley. She shared. God. Yeah, she shared obviously her scares, because she's got like a line of breast cancer in her side of the family, hasn't she? Yeah. How important is it for women to constantly get screened and get checked for these sort of things?
Well, I don't think I can really comment on that, because my father's quite anti screening.
Right, okay.
So, and also I don't have enough knowledge, but yeah, I probably wouldn't comment on that, because I'd probably upset my father.
No problem at all. Again, we'll go back to obviously the situation we're in just now with COVID. I mean, we've got a family friend who's going through breast cancer treatment at the moment. Do Do you think that a lot of anxiety surrounding maybe women at the moment that maybe are going through treatment, whether it be breast cancer or anything else out with COVID, that maybe these sort of appointments might be put off because of the strain that's on the NHS, do you think?
Do you know what? I find it horrific. In fact, this brings me into, reminds me of one of the best people I've ever interviewed is Deborah James, who actually goes by the name of Bowel Babe. She's very well known in the cancer community. She has her own podcast. And she's actually also writes a column for The Sun. So she's been in the news a lot about, having cancer treatment during these times. I mean, she's a patient at the Royal Marsden in London, which is, the best cancer hospital. But, she's written, and actually I've read with fascination about how she's sort of, able to still get her chemo, able to go and sort of cope amongst all this terrible worry as well about getting COVID. Although I did just read an article that she'd been vaccinated last week, so I was so happy. But I just think it's horrendous reading all the figures of people, that have either had their appointments cancelled or they've been too scared to go. Especially where I live. We live in northwest London, where the hospital is the Royal Free Hospital. Is our local main NHS hospital. It was actually there, I think Panorama did a show on it to show you what actually went on in the COVID wards. And it's horrendous. I mean, I could hear ambulances non-stop the whole way through the pandemic going to the Royal Free Hospital. Yeah.
You're involved in quite a lot of charities as well, I believe, yeah?
I am a big supporter of High, which is a cancer charity. It's actually a wonderful charity. And actually, the nice thing for me during lockdown was I really wanted to help the charities, because obviously for all charities, it's been an utter nightmare. So every time a charity came to me and said, would you interview a guest or would you do like a live Zoom? I was beaming, because it made me feel good that I could actually, firstly, it was nice to be asked, and secondly, it was a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, have you got any interviews lined up in the coming weeks that you can share with us that we can keep an eye out for?
Well, like I said to you, I'm interviewing Kerry Katona, who you had on as your guest last time. Who else? I'm trying to think. I'm trying to get the Duke. So you wouldn't know who this is, but anyone that's watched Bridgerton knows the Duke is the main man. So I'm hoping to interview the Duke. What else? Gosh, loads of things.
If there was anybody that I could say, okay, right, we've got free reign the whole world, we can just dial in and interview them right now, who would you like to speak to?
I was going to speak to my 10-year-old son, which is the Spurs player. I told you it's the Spurs team, but I don't know football, so I don't know who they are.
We'll get Harry Kane on.
I'd love Harry Kane. In fact, talking about Harry Kane, I interviewed Peter Crouch about 2 years ago. That was amazing. And again, I said to you, I don't know anything about football, but I managed to bluff my way through. And
how did your son's response to that after you said all that?
Crazy. In fact, they never retweet or never re-Instagram anything of mine. But that, honestly, they were all like, Mum, you are the coolest mum ever. That didn't last long.
If we were to do another interview, say, in 5 years' time, what would you like to achieve between like this point and in 5 years?
So people say to me, maybe you should think about being an editor of a magazine or a newspaper, but I don't really have managerial skills, and I love sort of chatting and doing interviews. So maybe a podcast, a bit like maybe what you're doing. I don't know if anyone would want to hear my voice though, but I love chatting to people. And I love the buzz of it. So maybe a podcast, or I love live television. I did have a stint on QVC, which I loved. I just love live. I love doing things live because I'm a bit of an overthinker. And I've decided when I'm doing things live, for example, now with you, that thing, the overthinking, the worrying about COVID, the worrying about this, it goes. So I think doing something live makes me sort of happier in myself.
Yeah, you mentioned you've done a bit of TV, you've done magazines, loads of writing, obviously. You ever done radio at all? Ever thought about going down that route?
I've never done radio, and I'm really good friends with Harriet Scott, who's a DJ, and I love Harriet. No, I don't think I could do radio.
Well, maybe if we do this interview in 5 years' time, I bet you've done some radio, I bet.
I don't Thank you.
Do you ever sort of do any of the political interviews at all? Do you ever interview any? But no, you stay right clear of that. Stick to the beauty and the celebs.
Two things. I can't do politics and I know nothing about geography. And my son is actually studying geography at university and I am, I'm not putting myself down, but I really know nothing about either of them. Or capital cities. I know nothing about capital cities.
Do you think any of your sons will maybe follow in your footsteps and do any sort of journalism work? No.
No, I think they want to be like their dads. I think I tell them not. He's a lawyer, as I said before, and works the most ridiculous hours. So I say to them, don't be a lawyer like Daddy, you'll never see your wife. But that's obviously all changed because he's been at home for a year.
Yeah, well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, Suzanne. Thank you very much for giving up the time and coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, Suzanne Baum.
Thank you for having me. Really lovely.